Hi, this is Mr. Smith, and these are the notes for the second unit of economics in the honors class, which is public sector economics. We'll be talking about the government and how it addresses certain issues and provides public goods and services. And this is, of course, through mostly a macroeconomic perspective when we're looking at government intervention or interference, according to some people. So first we'll look at positive externalities in public goods. And in this particular section, why the private sector underinvests in innovation, so why it doesn't do enough for things like research, for instance, and creation, how government can encourage it instead, and the existence overall of public goods that are goods provided by the government. And the reason why it's called public goods is because we're all contributing to the government through elections and also taxes in particular. And so here we can see an image of a view from Voyager, a probe launched by NASA. And exploring space, of course, it has been able to send back photographs. And obviously, there's not a lot of private sector motivation to do something like this. They're not going to be able to collect any type of revenues or get prices or costs from people, for instance, living in space, because there's no one living in space, there's no customers. The best they might hope for is to retrieve materials or some type of data that is going to be helpful in making a profit later on. But then is there a market for that? And the extraordinary cost associated with space exploration, is it feasible for a private company to do it? And in most cases, the answer is no. So, with the exception of weather satellites and GPS and other types of things, beyond that, there really isn't a marketplace for space exploration. And so we call that private sector market failure. And so instead, the public sector becomes involved. So the benefits, for instance, of the Voyager probe help us for further space exploration, but also to understand the physics and chemistry and other types of sciences that also involve the Earth. And of course, each step we take into space also furthers the possibility of greater steps taken into the future. So when we look at positive externalities in public goods, there's all kinds of advancements that we can have through things like space exploration or investment in sciences in general. GPS, I just named, was one of them, but also some of the other inventions that have occurred because of just space exploration. And then research and development within medicine and also climate. For instance, the United States provides a lot of the data for private companies that do broadcast weather forecasts. That data actually comes from the United States government. So a lot of these aspects show you that the public sector is heavily involved in some places, and we'll talk about why that is and what kind of investments happen and what the overall benefit of that is. So positive externalities do happen. Positive externalities are positive side effects because of production. And these occur at a benefit of everyone, not just the people involved in producing or consuming those particular products. And so, for instance, if there is a disease that's cured, it's not just the people who might have gotten sick from it or did get sick, but everyone in society, because now we don't have to worry about this disease. This economy can go on as normal. People are going to have to be worried. COVID would be a good example of that. The vaccine for COVID, once it's developed, will help out not just people who are susceptible to the disease, but everyone, because now we won't have to be on lockdown. We won't have to be afraid of going out or visiting our grandparents or anything like that. So there's positive externalities that occur because of innovation, investment, and exploration and creativity. But not all the time are private companies willing to do that because they aren't getting anything out of that positive externality. So why bother? And so it just happens inadvertently within the private marketplace. So, as you can see here on the screen, market competition can provide an incentive for discovering new technology because a firm can earn higher profits, and that's a thing. It's just for their own self-interest. by finding a way to produce products more cheaply, by creating products with characteristics consumers want. In some cases, competition can discourage new technology, especially when other firms can quickly copy a new idea. So they get a new idea, they have a new technology, and perhaps there are many facets for that technology to be utilized in other industries, but because that company discovered it first, and they're going to make all the profit out of it, and they already have an assembly line ready to produce it, other companies are going to say, well, what's the point in getting involved in that? So that's one of the downsides. And studies by economists have found that the original inventor receives 1/3 to half of the total economic benefits from innovations, while other businesses and new product users receive the rest. So that's pretty impressive. Just for example, other inventors like Thomas Edison and Eli Whitney and others have certainly created inventive products, but because of that, just to give the light bulb as an example, it's not just the fact that the customer who purchases a light bulb can now see in their home. It's because of safety from street lights, and the fact that businesses can be open later and people can enjoy sporting events and entertainment functions because of lighting. So there's lots of other things that go beyond the original purchasers of those products. Positive externalities happen a lot with new technology, and they also happen with research and development. And these often help in a way that people don't necessarily foresee. The private benefits, the benefits of a person who consumes the good or services received, or a new product's benefits or process that a company invents, the company captures. So this only applies to the suppliers and those that are demanding, so the producers and consumers. The social benefits are the value of all the positive externalities of the new idea or product, whether enjoyed by other companies or society as a whole, as well as the private benefits that the firm developed the new technology receives. So the social benefits equals private benefits plus external benefits. Positive externalities or benefits, beneficial spillovers to a third party or parties. So here we can see an example, and this is the quantity of financial capital. So this is the amount of money. Now, this is going to be a little bit confusing because when we see supply and demand graphs on the horizontal axis, we often see quantity, and then the price is here on the vertical axis. But this is a little bit different, but at the same time, it's similar because here we're talking about the quantity of financial capital. So this isn't the actual price. This is the quantity or amount of financial capital, the investment that's occurring. I believe in this example, we're looking at a pharmaceutical company, and this is the rate of return. So how much are they making back on their investment? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10%. And here we can see the amount of, or the rate of return versus the quantity of financial capital. Here we can see when they invest very little, closer to $30 million, and you can see they can receive an 8% return. If they invest $52 million, they're going to receive a 4% return. However, this line here is the social benefit that is received, or the positive externality. And so you can see the total society's benefit of the $52 million is going to be 8%. So that's pretty considerable. It's twice the amount that was received by the company, which is similar to what the fraction we went over earlier was. So really, it would be beneficial for society to perhaps also invest in the difference, to put in more money into research and development. So if this company applied for a grant, it might be perceivable that it would then put in the total $52 million. Well, they would have to. If it was a grant, it would be required. And then everyone would receive an 8% return. But otherwise, there's not too much of a motivational factor for them, because if there is no government money coming in, it's just a private investment. From the $52 million, they're only getting 4% return. Whereas if they invest even less, they might receive an 8% return. So they're going to be puzzled as like, why would we invest more if that happens? So big drug faces a cost of borrowing 8%. If the firm receives only the private benefit of investing in research and development, then we show its demand curve for financial capital by D, 7 private, and the equilibrium will occur at 30 million. Because there are spillover benefits, society would find it optimal to have 52 million of investment. If the firm could keep the social benefits of investment for itself, its demand curve for financial capital would be D-social, and it would be willing to borrow the $52 million. The firm's private demand curve would be the same as society's demand curve. But unless there is a way for the company to fully enjoy the total benefits, then it will borrow less than the socially optimum level. So they will end up borrowing at a much lower level. So that's why it's often beneficial for governments, some people would say, especially in the science community, to promote the extra investment. The investment in education or human capital requires a certain upfront cost with an uncertain future benefit because they don't know for certain that this is going to happen. It's possible, it's plausible, but there's no certainty. The idea is that higher levels of education attainment will eventually serve to increase the person's future productivity and subsequent ability to earn. So this is talking about investment in education, which is part of the whole research and development. Economists have found that through several studies that the rate of return of a college education to that person in the United States is approximately 10 to 15%. Private rates of return, the estimated rates of return, go primarily to an individual, for example, earning interest on the savings account. Society also gains from investing in the education of another student. And this often comes up. I remember being once at a hardware store, and the gentleman behind the counter was complaining about property taxes. And he said, I graduated 40 years ago. Why am I still paying property taxes to the school district? Well, you're not paying for your education. You're paying for everyone's education because it's beneficial for him that everybody comes into his hardware store. He doesn't have to read things to or count the money one thing at a time, one unit at a time. And it's beneficial that he can interact with salespeople and contractors and all that. They can read and write and perform basic arithmetic. So it's beneficial that he lives in a more educated society. The societal rate of return on schooling is also positive. Better health outcomes for the population, PE. Some people might not like PE, but actually it does help educate everyone about exercise and better nutrition. Education also helps create lower levels of crime, a cleaner environment, and a more stable democratic government. The social rate of return, when the estimated rates of return go primarily to society. And the appropriate public policy response to a positive externality, like a new technology, is help the party creating the positive externality receive a greater share of the social benefits. So how do we do this? How do we help the party creating the positive externality? It's through providing subsidies. And subsidies are grants, usually. They could also provide low-interest loans, but subsidies are usually the way to go to encourage them because if a company's going to have to pay it back, they're going to look at that negatively. But a subsidy gives them that extra money to make up the difference of where they might not have been willing to put forward the same amount of investment as before. So here we can see the market for flu shots with spillover benefits or positive externality. And we can see that the vertical axis is set up for price per vaccine. And that's similar in microeconomics when we look at supply and demand. The vertical axis is going to be the price. Down here we see the quantity of flu vaccines. And this is similar to in microeconomics, the supply and demand curves. Quantity is going to be on the horizontal axis. And so ignore the rest of these lines. This is the demand curve in the marketplace. So this is demand in the marketplace for flu vaccinations. So this is what people want, what people are going to buy from the company, the pharmaceutical company known as Big Drug. And this is the supply. So how much this company is willing to supply at each price level. And you can see this follows the law of demand and the law of supply. According to the law of demand, if the price is high, like in this case here, the price is high in the marketplace, the quantity is going to be low. And if the price is low, we can see here the price is at 0, then it's going to be incredibly popular. It's going to fly off the shelves. So the quantity is high. And this also follows the law of supply, because at a low price, drug company isn't going to want to sell a lot of these because why? They're not going to make a lot of money off of it. But if they could sell it for a high price, they're going to want to produce as much as possible so they can make a big profit. And whenever these two intersect is known as the equilibrium. That is the optimal price that provides the consumer and the producer with the highest amount of benefit. Then we have the positive externality, the spillover benefits that occur. And so this is in consideration of what society might receive out of this. And so the equilibrium in the social atmosphere, the social outcome, is going to be much higher. So there's a greater value, and it's valuable to produce a greater quantity. So in the marketplace, the most efficient quantity produced is going to be here, just like this is the most efficient price. But for society, it makes sense for this much quantity to be produced, which is greater than what the marketplace might actually manufacture. The equilibrium quantity of flu shots produced in the market, where MPB equals MPC, is going to result in only this much quantity, the quantity of the marketplace being produced, which is less than what is best for society. And this would be the price. And these other abbreviations like MSB, marginal social benefit, MPC, marginal price cost or private sector cost, and marginal private benefit are what those abbreviations all stand for. The market demand curve does not reflect the positive externality of flu vaccinations, so only the quantity of the marketplace will be exchanged. So the private company doesn't care about all this. They don't care about the optimal benefit point for society. They're only interested in what they're going to be able to get out of the system. So they're only going to want to produce this much of the flu vaccination. This outcome is inefficient because the marginal social benefit, when it intersects the supply curve, is going to be way up here, and so the quantity is going to be greater. So this is the inefficiency or underutilization that's occurring. So the solution is for the government to provide a subsidy to consumers of flu shots equal to the marginal social benefit minus the marginal private benefit. And so you can see here the price of the social, and then this is, or the value, and this is the price at the marketplace. And so the difference between there has to be provided by a subsidy. The company might be willing to put this much into it, so the remainder part of it is going to have to be put into by the government. You might wonder, why is the subsidy covering this entire difference here? Well, that would be a good question. This is through government research, and maybe even the company did this, because that's possible. They might want to actually see how much benefit to society would be and what the optimal amount of flu vaccines to produce would be, and they might actually lobby the government saying, hey, look how much this will help, and this is how many we need to produce, but that's not in our best interest because we won't be able to make enough money off of it. So either party could do that, or maybe a third party, some kind of health organization. But anyway, they decide through that research, this is the optimal quantity for society to benefit at the greatest amount. So the problem is they will be supplying this much. And if you look where this line intersects the demand of the marketplace, if that much was going to be supplied, then this amount where it intersects the demand curve is how much would be wanted in the marketplace. This is how much the company would otherwise be getting out of it. And so that is why it's going to cover the difference here with the subsidy. And once again, that's why the marketplace benefit, the difference between it and the marketplace cost, which is here, why they're going to cover the difference between the two. Because the company could say, well, if we were to make that much, this is how much would be demanded, and this is how many customers we would get. So when we graph this out mathematically, this is the difference between the two. So the government would have to pony up this amount of subsidy in order to make it enticing for the company as well. Different government policies can increase the incentives to innovate. Guaranteeing intellectual property rights, like patents and copyrights. That would be an example. And you can see down here, it describes intellectual property rights. The body of law includes patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secret law that protect the right of inventors to produce and sell their inventions. Patents give the inventor the exclusive legal right to make, use, or sell the invention for a limited time. Copyright laws give the author an exclusive legal right over the works of literature, music, film, video, and pictures, so the arts. This is controversial. It does help new inventors, especially if you're the little guy and you want to produce something. You don't want someone bigger to steal it, that can mass produce it and sell it and make all kinds of money, and then you're left with nothing. On the other hand, big companies get patents, and that limits competition. That does not allow others to then take that product and build upon it. And it also means, with government protection, that company can charge sometimes exorbitant prices. Now, people can file complaints about that through the legal process, and it's possible for the company to then retract some of that. And of course, companies are aware of this. They do research and see, well, how much can we charge without people getting upset about it. So all that does take place, but some people would point out, hey, that's even more research and time and effort and cost put into this product that otherwise wouldn't happen without the patent or the generated government monopoly that's been allowed here. So they can be good, they can be bad. Government assistance with the cost of research and development. This, of course, helps provide that boost in subsidy, so that way companies can produce more, or, going back to this previous slide, so that greater capital is invested and there can be a greater rate of return, including for society. The problem with that is the government isn't always the best in handing this money out. There's only so much money that's put into research and development, or R&D, as it's called. So are they going to pick the right winners for the process? And the answer is not always yes. Sometimes they make bad investments and the research doesn't go anywhere. But the problem that scientists would respond is that you don't know what's going to happen with research. There have been plenty of inventions that were created or discoveries that were made that didn't really have a practical need in mind. And people didn't foresee that these things would be created or discovered. So that's the problem, is it's kind of a gamble, and some people don't think it's right to do that with taxpayers' money. And then cooperative research ventures between universities and companies, especially if universities are publicly backed. And once again, some people will say that's good because it helps also with education and expose universities to more students and grant money and research and laboratories. On the other hand, though, some people say you're making universities competitors with private companies that could be doing this research and making a profit off of it instead. Here you can see patents filed between 1981 and 2012. Patents filed and patents granted. So you can see not all of them are necessarily granted based on the existence of something else that's similar, or that another company has filed it, or that it basically is something that the patent office doesn't feel is worthy of a patent. If the private sector does not have sufficient incentive to carry out research development, one possibility is for the government to fund such work directly, so do it all themselves. Government spending can provide direct financial support for research and development at colleges and universities, nonprofit research entities, sometimes by private firms, and government-run laboratories. But once again, then it's putting all of the taxpayer money into something that could be a gamble, and government-run laboratories compete with private sector-run laboratories. And the government doesn't necessarily have a monopoly, but at the same time, it does take away from the incentive and competition that occurs in the private sector of whatever that laboratory might otherwise be competing with if it wasn't part of the government. A complementary approach is to give firms a reduction in taxes depending on how much research and development they do. And businesses of all types are allowed to do this. Investments that they make, they often deduct from their taxes. The federal government refers to this policy as research and experimentation tax credit. Studies find that each dollar of foregone tax revenue through research and experimentation tax credit causes firms to invest at least $1 or more in research and development. So it's kind of to entice them to put more money into the system. State and federal government support for research in a variety of ways, such as through partnerships and grants for innovative projects. Examples would be the National Institute of Health, or NIH, the National Academy of Sciences, and the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative. Cooperation between government-funded universities, academies, and private sector can spur product innovation and create whole new industries. The last section is about public goods, and these, once again, are goods provided by the government, the public sector. So public good is non-excludable, so everyone has access to it, non-rival, so the competition of it, and is difficult for market producers to sell to individual consumers. Non-excludable, once again, it's impossible to exclude someone from using the good and thus hard to charge for it. Even when one person uses the public good, another can also use it, so it's non-rival. So there's no competition in the consumption of this particular product. So fire, police services, national defense, those will all be examples of non-excludable and non-rival. When the student council at Ticeville High School pays for fireworks and everybody in town can look at them, everyone can look at them. There's no blind, there's no giant shield put up so everybody outside at Carter Field can't look at them. And it's non-rival because you looking at them and enjoying them isn't taking away from me looking at them and enjoying them. A free rider are those who want others to pay for the public goods and then plan to use the goods themselves. If many people act as free riders, then public goods may never be provided. The free rider problem could be expressed in a similar term as the prisoner's dilemma game. And this is a game theory that was developed by Albert Tucker, a mathematician. And just to make a long story kind of short, because it's talked about later on in economics, but if there are two people caught and they are being pressured to confess or at least testify against each other, their progress in the process of being interviewed by the police is going to change drastically if they're kept totally separated from each other, as opposed to if they're cooperating with each other. Because if they were cooperating with each other, they would tell, hey, if you don't confess, I won't confess, and then we'll both get out of here. But if they're kept separate, they're not going to know that, and they're going to suspect the other person might testify. And so they'll rush to testify first, but that's a big risk because if they both testify, they'll both go to jail. So it becomes more complex when people don't cooperate, and people will act in a more and more irrational manner. And when it comes to the free riders, of course, these are people enjoying a public good. Let's say watching the fireworks. If student council solicits the town, goes door to door and asks for donations, some people are just going to say, well, I'll just pretend I'm not home. I'm not going to donate. I'll just enjoy these fireworks for free. And then another person might think that, another person. But if a lot of people don't do it, then maybe student council wouldn't have the money for it, so they couldn't put on the fireworks. So it's only if there's public knowledge. Like if you see other people donating to it, then you're going to feel relieved and you say, well, I won't have to do this instead. So if many people act as free riders, if a lot of people on their own without any information from anyone else decide not to contribute to something, then the public good may never be provided. The key to paying for public goods is to ensure that everyone will make contributions. This is done through government spending and taxes. In some cases, markets can produce public goods. This creates an indirect way of charging for it. Radio is a public good, but revenue is made by selling advertising and charging listeners by taking up some of their time. Social pressures and personal appeals can also reduce the number of free riders and to collect resources for the public good. So even though I said earlier, public sector is government, technically in this case, it's also true for radio because we can all receive that without paying anything for it except the use of our time listening to commercials. Usually when we've heard of public sector economics, it just involves the government, but this would be one case where it involves something else. Advances in public health have all been closely linked to positive externalities in public goods. Rise in life expectancy seems to stem from three primary factors related to public health programs and goods: public sanitation systems, clean water, and disposing of human waste; medical discoveries from government or university-funded research such as immunizations, antibiotics, high blood pressure reducers; and changes in public behavior through government health campaigns. Examples: hand washing, which is exceptionally important during a pandemic; food storage and protection, reducing tobacco smokers; and precautions against sexually transmitted diseases. All of these help benefit society in general because they reduce the demand for healthcare, and that reduces the price for healthcare, and then everyone ends up benefiting from that. And you also have more customers, and you have less worrying to do, and society can be more productive if people are healthy. So those are all socially optimal benefits that occur from these types of systems. So, for instance, during the pandemic, we all pay tax dollars. It all goes into advertising. The CDC puts out radio and TV ads and social media and posters and all kinds of other things to encourage people, for instance, to washing their hands. And so that ends up benefiting all of us, whether or not we'll get the disease or if we had it in the past. That's irrelevant because all of us will receive that socially optimal benefit that occurs, which is a positive externality. And if it was just up to private companies, there's not really that many companies that could do all of that. Obviously, a TV network could advertise across the entire nation, but they couldn't get out the message necessarily everywhere else, and they couldn't get hospitals to promote it in local communities. And so the government is often the only one big enough to do some of these public provisions of goods, and they are the only ones that have the revenue for it, because who's going to pay for that? What private company or consumer is going to pay for this information to go out? So that comes from tax dollars. So that way the government could say, well, everyone help pay for this. Of course, it's a libertarian would remind us it is paid for by force. And so that's something important to think about is from the libertarian perspective, totally free market. Would the National or the Centers for Disease Control do that? Would they advertise for hand washing? An extreme libertarian might say, well, it's good to wear masks. It's good to wash your hands. We're all rational people because libertarians like to promote rationalism. And they would say, but we're rational as individuals. We're not as rational or efficient as a society. And so it's really up to people whether or not they should do these things. So maybe the government shouldn't be involved in promoting it. People themselves should promote it by good example and by talking to one another and to educating one another. But otherwise, maybe the government shouldn't be involved. But the question is, if that was the case, would the message get across to as many people as possible, benefiting society as much as possible? And the answer is probably no. And you'd have to ask the person that is against any type of public sector involvement, even in the case of a pandemic, would that really be beneficial for the individual? If you're only looking out for yourself, okay, but would it really be beneficial if more people were not following this advice because the message wasn't out there and a lot more people were sick and filling up hospitals or being productive or weren't being productive at work? Would that be beneficial for you as an individual? And if pressed, many people would have to answer, well, no, of course not. So that's the issue right there is will this legitimately not just help out society as a whole, but can you convince individuals that this is beneficial for society to get behind through the public sector?